At Alara 7, full is a code word for not your kind.
Cliff, I didn't pay for a VIP view to look at the south side all night. Get him out of the walkway.
Colt Whitmore didn't see a father. He saw an infestation.
Look at this. Another one trying to fake it for the gram.
Probably used his whole stimulus check just to stand in the lobby. Listen to me, boy. I've been here 9 years. I know what belongs here, and it isn't you. Security, remove this animal before he makes the girl cry anymore.
Colt, I don't need a reservation to sit in a building I own.
They told him he didn't
Mr.
belong in the
Okafor,
room.
I didn't realize.
He
I
told
know
them
what you realize,
they were
Cliff.
trespassing
Pack your
in
desk.
his house.
Get him out of my sight.
Yo, that man just tore up a 9-year-old's birthday like it was nothing. He has no idea whose building he's standing in right now. Let's see how this plays out.
Alara 7 sits on the 43rd floor of the Aldridge Tower on North Michigan Avenue, Chicago, a restaurant that doesn't advertise because it has never once needed to. Tasting menu starts at $340 a head. The VIP booths along the north wall cost an extra $200 just to access, booked 3 weeks out, non-refundable. White Calacatta marble, imported from Bologna, lighting calibrated to make champagne glow, and, the designers noted in a memo they never expected outsiders to read, calibrated to make certain skin glow with it too, and certain skin fade into shadow instead. A jazz quartet plays softly enough in the corner that conversations stay private. Staff move without quite being seen. Every surface, every angle of light has been engineered by people who understood exactly what kind of comfort they were selling, and to whom. At 7:48 p.m., Darnell Okafor walked in 12 minutes early, holding his daughter Zuri's hand. She'd picked the dress herself, white with small yellow flowers, $67, the most beautiful dress in the whole store, that said with enough certainty that he hadn't looked at the price tag. Zuri was 9, and she counted things the way some kids count things when patience has been asked of them more than most children ever have to give. She'd insisted on carrying her own balloon the whole way from the car, gold letters spelling out 10, like the number itself mattered more than anything else that would happen tonight. The hostess looked at Zuri first, then Darnell, then her screen. Her expression didn't change so much as recalibrate. "I'm not finding that reservation," she said. She was 23, 3 months into the job, and had never once been told who actually owned the restaurant she worked in. Almost nobody on staff had. That was, as it turned out, exactly the point. Darnell showed her the confirmation on his phone. Booking reference, VIP Booth 4, the $200 charge on his card statement from 5 weeks ago. Our system shows this was released due to inactivity. "I confirmed it Tuesday," Darnell said. "I have that email too." She glanced past him, just for half a second, toward the north wall, toward booth 4, where a man and woman were already seated with drinks in hand. Then back to her screen. "I can offer you something near the window." "Near which window?" She didn't answer that one. It faced the elevator bank, no view. The table Alara 7 used for problems. Darnell didn't move from the host stand. He'd learned a long time ago that the fastest way to lose a negotiation was to accept the first offer designed to make you disappear quietly. So he stood there, calm, holding his daughter's hand, and waited. The man in the gray suit at the nearest table leaned toward his date. "Watch," he said. "This happens every time somebody tries to sneak into a section they can't afford." "He's got a reservation confirmation on his phone," his date said, frowning slightly. "Anyone can screenshot a confirmation," he said, already turning back to his menu. Clifton Hare, the general manager, arrived before Darnell could push further. He'd been watching from the host stand the whole time. Clifton had been running Alara 7 for 3 years, ever since the ownership group behind it went through a quiet restructuring and the restaurant's operating entity changed hands entirely. He'd been hired, in a single 40-minute meeting, by a man he'd since seen in person exactly twice. Everything since then had run through email, through his attorney, through a property management firm that handled the paperwork so the owner never had to. Clifton had built his entire management style around one operating assumption: the man who signed his checks was never coming through that door. "Good evening," Clifton said, warm-voiced, body angled just enough to occupy the space without quite blocking it. "I understand there's some confusion. Let me help." He looked at the reservation confirmation for 4 seconds. 4 seconds isn't enough time to review anything. It's exactly enough time to confirm a decision you already made. VIP tier requires reconfirmation within 24 hours, Clifton said. Standard policy. It's not in the email. It's in the terms and conditions on the booking portal. Which page? Clifton smiled without answering that either. "Sir, I'd love to accommodate you and your..." His eyes flicked to Zuri, and the pause did more work than any word could have. "Your family. We have a lovely table available. I want the table I reserved." That was when the voice from booth 4 carried across the room, easy and loud and not even slightly accidental. "Cliff, is there going to be an issue tonight?" Clifton straightened like a man snapping to attention. "Not at all, Mr. Whitmore." "Good," Colt Whitmore said, swirling his glass. "Some of us worked very hard to make sure spaces like this stayed a certain way. I'd hate for that to start changing now." His wife already had her phone up, not hiding it. She'd been recording since Darnell walked in. Zuri tugged her father's hand.
Daddy,
She whispered. "It's okay." It was not okay. Darnell Okafor, who had spent his whole adult life being told by the architecture of rooms that he didn't belong in them, felt something tighten in his chest and, carefully, chose not to release it. Not yet. Colt Whitmore stood up from the booth, taller standing. He crossed the floor with the unhurried comfort of a man who tipped enough, often enough, that every person on this floor treated him like he had authority he'd never actually been given. He was 46, managing director at a private wealth firm downtown, a regular at Alara 7 for 9 years, generous with a tip and generous with the assumption that generosity had purchased him something more than good service. Staff called him Mr. Whitmore, the way they'd call an owner Mr. Whitmore, and nobody had ever bothered to correct that, least of all Colt. He had never once, in 9 years, been told no at this restaurant. Not about a table, not about a bottle held back for a better client, not about closing time on a slow Tuesday. He had built an entire private mythology around that fact, quietly convinced that the deference he received was proof of something about him rather than proof of something about the size of his tab. "Look," he said, in the tone men use when they mean listen carefully, because I'm only explaining this once. I didn't realize they'd started letting just anyone book this section. There are places in this restaurant you'd probably enjoy more. He looked at Zuri when he said, probably enjoy more. Directly at her. Maybe take her somewhere she'll actually feel comfortable, he added. Somewhere more her speed. The implication wasn't subtle, and it wasn't accidental. "My reservation says booth 4, Darnell said. "That's where I'd like to sit." "Your reservation," Colt repeated, letting the words sit there like it tasted strange in his mouth. "Cliff, does he actually have a reservation, or is this one of those situations?" One of those situations wasn't defined. It didn't need to be. Clifton understood exactly which situation Colt meant, and so, by now, did most of the room. Something shifted, very slightly, in Clifton's face. He'd seen that particular navy jacket before, not the man's face, not clearly, not in 3 years, but something about the way the man stood, unhurried, unbothered, holding his daughter's hand like he had all the time in the world, snagged at a memory Clifton couldn't quite place yet. "We're reviewing it now, Mr. Whitmore," Clifton said, but his voice had lost some of its earlier certainty. "Take your time," Colt said, in a tone that meant the opposite. A young server named Waverly Osei, moving past with a water pitcher, slowed without quite stopping. She was 27, 19 months at Alara 7, always the lunch shift, never weekends, for reasons Clifton had explained using words like scheduling and fit that never quite added up to an actual explanation. She was covering a colleague's emergency shift tonight, which was the only reason she was even on the floor on a Friday. She had a notes app with 31 entries going back 14 months. Dates, booth numbers, what was said, whenever she'd caught a name. She'd started keeping it the third time a guest told her to get a real server, and Clifton had looked straight through her when she reported it. She didn't pull out her phone yet. Not yet. An older server named Percy, 6 years on the floor, drifted close enough to murmur, "You should stay out of this."
I am staying out of it,
Waverly said.
I'm just standing here. You know what I mean.
I do, she said. I'm still just standing here. Woodlawn, Chicago, 23 years earlier. Darnell grew up on the 6300 block of South Ingleside, 3rd floor, heat that worked 8 months out of 12. His mother, Celestine, cleaned downtown office buildings 6 days a week and still checked his homework by 9 every night. He was 14 the first time a guidance counselor told him, flatly, across a metal desk, that engineering might be a reach for someone with your test scores. Darnell had scored in the 91st percentile on the state math exam that spring. The counselor hadn't looked at the file before saying it. He came home and told his mother. She didn't console him. She set down the iron she was using on someone else's tablecloth and said, "Bring me the application." He said it's a reach. "Bring me the application, Darnell." "Reach anyway," she told him, checking every line twice, without softness, because softness wasn't the thing he needed that night. Every door they close, you find the window.
You hear me? You find the window.
Back at Alara 7, Clifton was still holding the reservation printout, that half-formed recognition still nagging at the edge of his memory. Darnell got into Illinois Tech on a partial scholarship and a Pell Grant, graduated in 2007 with a job offer that got quietly rescinded 3 weeks before his start date, no explanation given. He found out years later that someone in hiring had said his communication style wasn't the right fit. The classmate who got the job instead, white, lower GPA, communication style never once questioned, started that same month. He spent 4 years doing site labor and drafting for developers who couldn't afford bigger firms, taught himself 3 modeling programs on a laptop he'd bought used, and started Okafor Structural Group in 2013 with $18,000 and one contract nobody else would take. Near the booth, Colt Whitmore was still talking, unaware that anyone was still listening, somewhere more her speed. By 2021, OSG had grown into more than an engineering firm. Its investment arm had started buying distressed commercial holdings across Chicago, buildings other people had run into the ground. One of those was a struggling hospitality group whose flagship restaurant, on the 43rd floor of a Michigan Avenue tower, was hemorrhaging money under an owner who'd rather sell than fix it. Darnell bought the whole thing outright. Not a stake, all of it. He hired Clifton Hare in a single meeting, gave him full operational authority, and told him the only instruction Darnell ever really gave, to run it well and run it fairly. Then Darnell went back to his real work, structural drawings and site visits, and 63 employees who needed him more than a restaurant did. He never planned to be an absent owner. Life simply made that decision for him 3 months later. The call came on a Tuesday. Zuri had been tired for weeks, the kind of tired a 6-year-old shouldn't be, and the pediatrician's referral turned into blood work, and the blood work turned into a word Darnell had never expected to hear attached to his daughter's name. For the next 2 years, Alara 7 simply stopped existing in his life. He signed what needed signing, forwarded what needed forwarding, and let Clifton run daily operations with a freedom Darnell never fully appreciated the cost of until much later. He didn't have the bandwidth to wonder how a restaurant treated its staff when there were transfusion schedules to track and a 9-year-old to keep believing in birthdays. The machines never fully stopped beeping, not even at 2 a.m. Darnell learned to read their rhythms the way he read structural load reports. Which sounds meant nothing. Which sounds meant, call the nurse. The night the oncologist came in with the word remission in her mouth, Zuri was awake, tangled in wires, a paper crown from a volunteer's art cart still crooked on her head. "Does that mean I'm done?" she'd asked. "It means the fight's going your way, baby." She turned the crown over in her small hands. "Daddy, next year, can we have a real birthday? A real one, where we dress up and go somewhere nice?" "Yeah, baby." He'd had to look away for a second before he trusted his voice. "We'll dress up. We'll go somewhere real nice. Promise?" "I promise." He had counted every month since. He'd never once considered taking her to Alara 7 for it. Not out of any grudge, just because in his mind, that restaurant had stopped being something he actually owned and started being paperwork he signed between hospital visits. Tonight was, in fact, the first time Darnell Okafor had ever personally set foot inside the restaurant he'd owned outright for 3 years. The copper bracelet on his wrist, a little crooked, 2 small blue beads, was the one Zuri had made him in the hospital's arts program during her second round of treatment. He'd worn it every day since. It was the only jewelry he owned. "Sir," Clifton said again, sharper now, but visibly less certain than he'd sounded a minute ago. "I need an answer." Colt Whitmore, warming to his own audience, raised his voice another notch. "Cliff, I really don't think this is complicated. It's giving, I don't know, community center. Not exactly Alara 7's usual crowd." Renata laughed at that, phone still up.
Daddy,
Zuri whispered. "Are we in trouble?" Darnell knelt slightly, just enough to meet her eyes. "No, baby, we're not in trouble." "Then why is everyone looking at us like that?" "Some people look at things they don't understand instead of asking about them," he said. "That's on them, not us." Colt, misreading the pause as hesitation, pressed further. "Look, I'm being reasonable here. Cliff can find you something in the back. Casual. You'd probably be more comfortable there anyway." "I'm comfortable exactly where I reserved," Darnell said. "You didn't reserve anything," Colt said. "I don't care how much cash he's carrying. Some things aren't for sale. Belonging isn't one of them." Darnell looked at him for a long moment, not with anger, with something closer to recognition. The specific patience of a man who has met 100 versions of Colt Whitmore across 2 decades and learned exactly how little there was to gain from arguing with any of them. Clifton's mouth opened slightly. The memory had almost surfaced. The navy jacket, that same unhurried stillness, a boardroom 3 years ago, 40 minutes, a handshake, but he swallowed it back down before it fully landed, because saying it out loud now, in front of Colt, in front of the room, felt like a door he wasn't ready to open. "Mr. Whitmore," Clifton said instead, quietly, trying a different angle. "Perhaps we might." "Cliff," Colt said, cutting him off. Done pretending this was still a conversation. "I want him removed. If he won't leave, call building security. If they won't do it, call the police. I don't care which." The word police landed differently than everything before it. A few tables went quiet in a new way, not entertained anymore, uneasy. Zuri's fingers found the hem of Darnell's jacket and gripped it. "You're going to call the police," Darnell said, on a man standing quietly with his 9-year-old holding a confirmed reservation because your friend doesn't want to share a dining room. "I'm going to call the police," Colt said, "because you're causing a disturbance and refusing a reasonable accommodation." "I haven't raised my voice once tonight." "You don't have to raise your voice to be a problem." Clifton, caught between the man he half recognized and the customer he'd spent 9 years accommodating, made the choice that would end his career 20 minutes later. He raised 2 fingers toward the host stand, signaling toward the small security post near the elevator bank. A guard named Ortiz crossed the dining room at Clifton's signal, young, new, uncertain, clearly unsure what he was walking into, but following the only instruction he'd been given. He stopped a few feet from Darnell. "Sir, I'm going to need you to come with me. On what grounds? Darnell said. Mr. Whitmore says you're causing a disturbance. Mr. Whitmore isn't the one who decides that. Ortiz reached, hesitantly, for Darnell's arm, not gripping, just a light touch meant to redirect, the kind of gesture that's supposed to look procedural on camera and feel like something else entirely to the person on the receiving end. Zuri's balloon slipped from her hand. It floated up toward the vaulted ceiling, gold letters catching the light, and nobody moved to catch it. "Don't touch my dad," she said, louder than anything she'd said all night, her voice cracking somewhere between fear and fury. That sentence did something to the room. A woman 2 tables over gasped audibly. Somewhere behind the bar, a glass clinked down harder than intended. But instead of quiet, the moment split the crowd wide open. "Oh, please," said a woman near the window, loud enough to carry, waving a hand like she was swatting away a fly. "Somebody's coached that kid well. That's a lawsuit audition if I've ever seen one." "They do this," her husband added, nodding along like he was confirming a well-known fact rather than inventing one on the spot. "Bring the kid so it looks worse." Classic. A third guest, further back, stood halfway from his chair. "Just get them out already. This is supposed to be a nice night." "Finally," someone muttered, and 3 separate tables actually applauded. A short, ugly ripple of clapping, the specific kind of applause that happens when a crowd has decided, together, that cruelty is entertainment rather than cruelty. Renata had abandoned any pretense of subtlety. She stood on the booth's cushioned bench for a better angle, phone held high, narrating live to her followers in a bright, breathless voice. "You guys are not going to believe what's happening right now. This is actually insane. Security is having to remove people." "Ma'am," Ortiz said to Zuri, awkwardly, clearly out of his depth. "I need you to step back, please." "She's 9, Darnell said, and for the first time all night, something sharp entered his voice. "She is 9 years old, and you are asking a 9-year-old to step back from her own father." Colt, riding the crowd's energy now, raised both hands theatrically to the room like a man addressing a jury. "This is exactly what's wrong with people today. Make a scene, bring a kid into it, and suddenly everyone else is the villain." "He tore up her birthday," a man's voice said, the first genuinely sympathetic voice all night, from a table Darnell hadn't even registered yet. Nobody paid him any attention. His words simply evaporated into the noise. Ortiz's radio crackled. He looked at Clifton, silently asking whether he was actually supposed to escalate this to a physical removal. Clifton, torn and visibly sweating now, didn't answer him either way. "Get her balloon down," Zuri said suddenly, looking up at the gold letters still drifting near the ceiling, and something about the smallness of the request, a child asking for the one uncomplicated thing she still wanted, cut through the noise in a way none of the shouting had. Nobody moved to get it. That comment reached further than Colt intended. At a nearby table, a woman in her 60s set down her wine glass with more force than the gesture required. "Excuse me," she said, standing. Her name was Beatrice Calloway, a retired federal magistrate visiting for her granddaughter's engagement dinner, and she had the specific carrying voice of someone who had spent 30 years being listened to, whether people wanted to or not. "I've been sitting here listening to a man threaten to call the police on someone for standing quietly with his daughter. I'd like to understand what crime, exactly, is being alleged." Colt turned, visibly recalibrating. "Ma'am, this doesn't concern you. It concerns anyone in this room with a functioning conscience," Beatrice said. "I sat on a federal bench for 11 years. I know what a disturbance actually looks like. This isn't one." "With respect," Clifton said quickly, sensing the room shifting under him, "this is a private matter between—" "It stopped being private the moment you tore a man's reservation into confetti in front of 200 people, Beatrice said, looking at Colt. "I didn't catch your name, and I don't especially want to." Darnell looked down at his daughter one more time. Then he stood a little straighter and opened the leather folio he'd carried in, the same slim folio he carried to every property review, out of the same methodical habit that had built OSG from $18,000 and one contract into 63 employees and 9 Chicago buildings. "Colt," he said, quiet, even, "I own the place." The words landed like something physical. Colt actually laughed, a short, disbelieving bark of a sound. "You what?" Darnell set a single document on the hostess stand. Heavy stock, the operating agreement for Alara 7 Hospitality LLC, his name on the signature line, dated 3 years back. "Cliff," Darnell said, "tell him." Clifton picked up the page the way people pick up something they've been quietly dreading for the last 4 minutes. His eyes moved down it. Then he looked up, and the color had already left his face. "He's telling the truth," Clifton said, voice barely holding together. "Mr. Okafor owns Alara 7. He has since the restructuring, 3 years ago." A pause, and then, quieter, the part that mattered most. "I recognized him a minute ago. I wasn't sure. I should have said something the second I was." The silence that followed lasted long enough for the jazz quartet to finish an entire phrase. "Daddy," Zuri said, tugging his sleeve, "does that mean we can sit down now?" Darnell looked at the room, at the tables that had laughed, at the man who'd torn his card into quarters, at the manager who'd recognized him and stayed quiet anyway, and then he looked down at his daughter. "Yeah, baby," he said.
We can sit down now.
Renata's phone had been broadcasting live to her Instagram story for 22 minutes by the time she remembered it existed. The clip, Colt's comments, her own whispered narration, Clifton's collapse, the folio, the words "I own the place," was screenshotted and reposted before she could delete a thing. She pulled the story down at 9:14. By 9:17, 14 accounts already had the saved footage. By Saturday morning, 1.2 million views. By Sunday night, 4.7 million. Clifton Hare was placed on administrative suspension by Saturday afternoon. His termination letter arrived Monday, and it wasn't framed around discrimination at all. The internal review concluded he'd recognized his employer, in person, and chosen to stay silent to protect a high-spending regular rather than protect the man who signed his paycheck. Breach of fiduciary duty, his separation agreement called it, in language considerably colder than anything about bias. The 4 discrimination complaints filed against his management over the prior 3 years, previously unreviewed, were reopened and handed to outside counsel the same week. Colt Whitmore's own firm called him on Monday morning. His compliance officer, a woman named Priscilla Odom, kept the call under 4 minutes. "Colt, I've watched the video, twice. It's being blown out of proportion. It was a seating dispute. It's 4.7 million views of you telling a father his daughter wasn't their speed. Our biggest client called this morning to ask if we still do business with people like that. Priscilla, you know me.
9 years.
I know you've never once been told no anywhere in this city. And I'm starting to understand why that might have been a mistake on everyone's part, not just yours. That's not fair. Fair isn't really the metric today. Optics are the metric today. And the optics are that a managing director at this firm spent 4 minutes on camera explaining to a little girl that she wasn't the restaurant's speed. I don't need to explain to you how that reads next to our diversity statement. So what happens now? It wasn't a question anymore. You're on leave, effective now, pending review. That's the version where this doesn't get worse for you. There's a version where it gets worse. He was quietly separated from the firm 3 weeks later. When Waverly Osei's employment attorney later named him as a witness in the discrimination suit against Alara 7's prior management, his own deposition took less than 20 minutes. Asked why he'd assumed Darnell didn't belong in the VIP section, Colt said, "I don't know, I just assumed." It was the only honest thing he said that day, and it was also the thing that ended his case for him. Waverly Osei's Notes app, 31 entries across 14 months, dates, booth numbers, exact quotes where she'd caught them, went to an employment attorney Saturday morning. By Wednesday, 2 former co-workers had joined her complaint. A 4th plaintiff signed on before the filing was even finished. Percy, the older server who'd told Waverly to stay out of it, submitted his own statement the following week, corroborating 3 incidents she'd already logged. He found her in the break room the day he filed it. "I should have backed you up that night," he said, "not just with the statement. That night." "You're backing me up now," Waverly said. "That's not the same thing." "No," she agreed, "it's not. But it's still something." The Tribune ran the story Tuesday. Viral video exposes pattern at Aldridge Towers flagship restaurant. A former bartender quietly let go 18 months earlier for reporting a guest's remark, told the reporter, "They made me feel like I was the problem for noticing." Beatrice Calloway gave a written statement without being asked twice. "I spent 11 years on the bench," she wrote, "and I've never seen a clearer example of someone abusing informal power because he assumed no one in the room could reach him. He assumed wrong twice that night, once about the man he was talking to, and once about the room he was talking in front of." The hostess who'd told Darnell his reservation was released due to inactivity, kept her job, reassigned to a different property after completing a mediation session with Darnell's attorney present. He didn't ask for her termination. She'd been 3 months into the job, and following instructions nobody had ever explained the real purpose of. He asked only that those instructions be put in writing, going forward, on record, so no manager could give them again without leaving a trail. Waverly turned down a management role Aldridge offered as part of an early settlement. She's enrolled now in a hospitality management program at DePaul on a scholarship funded, quietly, without his name attached, through a fund Darnell set up. He asked that it not be announced. It wasn't until she told the story herself, months later, in her own words. Zuri's birthday dinner happened 3 days late. Booth 4, north window, full view of the lake. She ordered the chocolate souffle and finished every bite. Darnell ordered the same. He left the new server a $400 tip. She wore the copper bracelet she'd made to match his. When the new sommelier complimented it politely, she told him proudly, "My daddy owns this whole restaurant." He laughed, assuming she was exaggerating the way kids do. She wasn't. In the months that followed, Darnell started coming back, not often, not announced, just enough that the staff stopped assuming the owner was a stranger to the building. He never gave a speech about it. He just showed up, sat in a regular booth like anyone else, and let his presence do the part no memo ever could. Everything Darnell Okafor built, every all-nighter, every site he worked with his own hands, every door that closed before he could reach the handle, was never really about the restaurant or the 9 buildings or watching a man's face lose its color over a single sentence. It was about one table, one night, one girl in a white dress with yellow flowers who'd spent 2 years in a hospital bed being told to stay strong, and a father who needed the world to prove to her, just once, that it could hold up its end. There's a version of that Friday where nobody in Darnell's jacket carries any paperwork at all, where he's just a man with a torn reservation and a confused 9-year-old, absorbing what the room decided about him before he'd said a word, going home quietly, because going home quietly was the only option the room ever offered him. That version happens more than anyone likes to admit. It happens at hostess stands and courthouse doors and hospital front desks, without a viral clip to correct the record. The only difference between that version and this one is that the man they decided didn't belong there had, in fact, owned the place the entire time. He didn't belong there, Colt had said. He owned it. If a room has ever decided who you were before you opened your mouth, tell us what happened when the truth finally caught up to it.